That's quite a promise to make, William said. His voice cracked like he hadn't slept well. He rubbed one sleepy eye while Fauve turned her face away from her father. It's very strange to see a species where the younger members of the family unit harbor a strong desire to look out for the elder caregiver, and yet this seems to be the norm in a contented family unit. Fauve did not want her father to see that she'd been crying. A note about humans crying. It is one of the single most unpleasant, ugly noises I have ever heard in all my life on any of the worlds I have traveled to. They gulp with their mouths, and snot comes out their noses, and they have the most piercing wail when they're very small, and more than that, they can't even talk properly. Even when they're of age, that speech is normal. Their eyes turn red and crack like glass that is on the verge of bleeding. Even happy crying is hard on the ears. From an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense. Their distress is unpleasant, and you want to alleviate it. But knowing why it was so unpleasant doesn't make it more pleasant. And Fauve, I guessed at least, was doing a lot of crying lately over the harassment she was receiving in her online world. To some degree at least, I irrationally blamed myself. You should have figured it wasn't just the incident itself. But the rational part of my mind reminded me, no, you're an alien, damn it. You came here to learn these things. If you already knew them, you wouldn't have needed to visit in the first place. I have to say, if I were to pick a moment where I realized I was as much test subject as observer in all this, then that was it. My reactions were so undlamisa-like, consistent worry over them, my irrational protectiveness of the child who gave me head scratches, chasing that blasted tennis ball, which I wanted to do again as soon as possible, though it would be a while yet as Fauve was uncomfortable leaving the house still. Everything about this, from the beginning, had changed as much as taught me. Perhaps that was why keeping Fauve's secret was so important, and I said nothing despite her distress. Instead, I answered William. From within his bedroom, I could hear Michael crying. I had to wonder if Fauve still sounded like that, when she was getting one vile message after another, and wondering what she'd done to make so many older men hate her that much, that they wanted to pile their vile messages on her that badly. It may sound like a difficult promise to keep, but it isn't. At least not this time, I said, and stood up like I was going to offer more reassurance, instead blocking his view of Fauve so she could make a hasty retreat. I wasn't completely successful as his eyes followed her retreating back until she rounded the landing and went the rest of the way up the stairs and back to her room. I wish I could offer that kind of reassurance, but I don't want to lie to her. He muttered, "Lawyers are expensive, though. Every time we file something, his lawyers file some kind of a motion or objection. It's expensive, and my wife and I aren't rich. Even with things how they are, you can still buy injustice sometimes." William said it quietly, but I saw the way his fingers twitched, and for that matter, so did his right eye. Now the human practice of law requires some explanation. Most worlds there is only one expert in law, but in fact, humans have every case represented by three, one for the accuser, one for the accused, and a judge who is not technically a lawyer, but is supposed to be knowledgeable on the subject. In theory, this provides balance, but where the system can be corrupted, say by the copious wealth of one party in the lawsuit relative to the other party, then the purpose of the lawyer is not to provide a vigorous defense, but rather to obscure the truth and bury the other side by draining their ability to pay for their representation or wear them out by way of a protracted battle of endurance. This was what the Walkers now feared. As Wolfbeard's father had a fortune, his expensive lawyers could threaten, cajole, and file whatever they needed to. It didn't matter if it was frivolous. It served to drain the Walkers' funds by forcing them to pay their own lawyer far more than they could afford. And they were paying a lawyer to defend me, to keep me from going to court and keep me from being arrested or my bail vacated. Somehow they became my humans. And my humans were going to be rendered poor because of what I did. I think it was more human than Dlamacin that I blamed myself for that. I hung my head and opened my mouth to say, "I'm sorry," or to render some kind of an apology as soon as I found the words. But it was at that moment that the doorbell rang. Like he knew what was on the other side, Michael's crying became louder, and Rebecca came into view, her eyes wide and hair hung limp and unkempt. William and I traded a glance. I was confident about my people's interference, but there was no telling how much would be done other than making it all go away. The harassment might stop, the charges against me would probably be dropped, but from the pale look on William's weary face, I could read that he was also concerned that Wolfbeard might manage to get his own charges dropped too. If he could be let go, how could my human ever feel safe? How could she believe she would ever be given justice? And would she ever be able to go anywhere without wondering if she'd see Wolfbeard around the next corner? Rebecca's words about why they wouldn't settle began to make more sense to me. As I imagined Wolfbeard's hand reaching out again, I knew two things: the regret that I had not bitten all the way through and removed it, and that I wished that my world would never encounter him or his like ever again. My tail and my ears stiffened as the knock at the door came again. "They're early this time. They must have figured out my routine." William laughed, but it was a dead man's laugh, and his eyes had never looked more hollow. I doubted he was really joking. He walked toward the door with a zombie-like shamble and opened it to find a skinny human in an expensive pinstripe suit and a fedora. For some reason, all the lawyers sent to the Walker home wore fedoras. This was not a popular hat for daily wear, and it made me think that it was almost like a uniform, or that perhaps it was something more like a message about who it came from. I don't know. I didn't approach the door, though all my hearts and air sacs were throbbing in my chest, and I could see over William's shoulder despite his effort to shield the view of the interior of the house from the visitor. More importantly, I could hear every word. "I know you filed a restraining order, Mr. Walker, but we are allowed to come to your home to serve you papers. I'm here in my capacity as an officer of the court, delivering notice that you are going to be sued for emotional and physical injury." The lawyer's snide voice had a high-pitched whine to it that was more shrill than a baby's cry. I hated it immediately. At least I didn't have to hear it for long as William cut him off. "You could have had anyone do that? This is an obvious attempt to get around my restraining order. Now get off my property." William snarled, his hand tightened on the doorknob like he was about to slam the door in the lawyer's face. Now, let's not be nasty. It's nothing personal, Mr. Walker. If you really believe some law has been broken, then you can always call your lawyer up and have him file a motion to limit court document delivery to those with no connection to the criminal defense side of things. It's only what, $500 an hour with the one you have now? I'm sure you can afford the 6 hours worth of document filings and hearings, and of course I'll be there to object, or one of my colleagues will be. I could see William's entire body shaking. If he hadn't been standing in the way, I was ready to rush the lawyer like I rushed Wolfbeard before. But then, quite unexpectedly, I could see the shaking stop, and I heard something I could not have timed better. That won't be necessary. After all, this is no longer a matter for the local court. The human lawyer inhaled loud as a jet streamed through his nose, and William let go of the door so it could swing open, and I could see the very welcome sight of a black-furred Dlamisa of substantial height. "This," the Dlamisa said, cutting off the question from Wolfbeard's daddy's lawyer, "is now a matter between the planetary government of Earth and Dlamius, regarding the treatment of one of our citizens and the laws of mutual aid between our allied species. Your client is overstepping his bounds in attempting to confine this to the lower court, and this is for you in your capacity as his representative." The Dlamisa was carrying a messenger bag over one shoulder, and when he finished, he drew out a paper on Dlamisian digital parchment, a specialized material used only for communication between governments. "And this is for your client," he said, and removed another. "And this is for your client's father." He repeated, and laid all three in the human's unthinking hand. "You'll all three of you be explaining your interference and harassment of the home of one of our off-world citizens. And since I've found you here where I definitely shouldn't have found you, this is for you personally." He then removed one more paper, though of more traditional human standard, and the lawyer's face went pale. "It's a summons to your... what do you call your legal review boards? The ones who say whether you have behaved ethically in the practice of law?" my counterpart asked. The lawyer did not answer. He looked down at the documents as if he were holding a hungry Gaxon, but did not dare to either drop them or speak. But my counterpart was not finished. "And to make sure there are no other problems," he turned and barked toward the street, and I could hear 2 doors slam. "These are guards from our embassy. They will be stationed at this house until matters between our governments are settled. Inform your employer that they are authorized to use any reasonable degree of force to protect our citizen, and what constitutes reasonable is at their discretion, thanks to your state's representative." But it isn't what it looks like." The human lawyer's pale face began to tremble, but in true Dlamisa fashion, with his business done on the matter of the lawyer, my representative turned his attention to William Walker. Your household is under the protection of your government and mine for the duration of the crisis. You will receive reimbursement for all expenses incurred on his behalf retroactive to the date of the Battle of Waterland Park, and any expenses incurred later going forward will be split between your government and my own. File through the same channels as paying for food or other costs. Do you have any questions, Mr. Walker? My representative was brusque, and to the point, his tail never wagged and he never cocked his head. I was grateful, but William spontaneously reached out and hugged him. His arms went round the Dlamison embassy representative like they were long-lost friends, and he looked at me past William's shoulder and asked, "Is the human all right? What's happening here?" I approached and gently disengaged William from my speaker and reassured the Dlamisa representative. "It's nothing. It's just a thing my humans do. You get used to it," I said while the two behemoths of Dlamison security guards ascended the steps. The representative of Wolfbeard's legal interests soon found himself beneath the two growling snouts of my people's military forces, and to my great joy, I got to watch sweat spring to his brow while he inched his way along the rail and back down toward the street. "Yes, well, it's fine then. If it's just the custom, I will go. My work is done," the speaker for my people stated, and departed without another word, leaving only relief and a sense of safety in his wake. Though if I may add one more minor note, I saw that his tail was wagging as he left the premises. I'm sure some of my colleagues will wonder if my affection for humanity represents an anomaly in me, rather than any power or quality of theirs to affect other lives. As I watched the human lawyer representing the Wolfbeard household retreat and whisper angry words into a cell phone, and felt an admittedly smug satisfaction at his distress, I also watched the departure of my homeworld's representative to Earth's capital city. Zenti, Dlamisons, Leontes, and peoples of all races who either read these words or are present as I speak them aloud in pursuit of my degree, I understand your skepticism. But when I saw my representative withdraw from the House of Walker, I saw his tail wagging. I could see his ears twitching with the telltale signs of confusion. He didn't know why, but I did. And now, having felt the grateful and warm embrace of a human father, I had no doubt he would start down the same road as my professor, myself, and my classmates. The students my professor chose were all bound to branches of the Walker family tree. This is another particular facet of humanity that is found little outside of their species. Some species center themselves around an ancient matriarch, or a royal family, who is said by fact or fiction to be a progenitor of their whole race. But beyond that, few races keep a close monitoring on their own immediate relatives, and almost none can tell you anything about their genetic relatives beyond 1 or 2 generations. Humans, however, have an intense fascination with where they come from and who they come from. Genealogy is an enormously popular hobby in which the houses of mankind trace back the travels, names, and lives of their forerunners. They gather letters, birth, death, marital records, stories from older relatives who keep their stories alive. This leads to very complex webs of marital relations. I happened to speak to the human publishing agent who had my book bound, and out of sheer curiosity, I asked about his ancestry. It turned out that he knew a great deal, that his ancestors were some of the first European settlers in North America, that one of the first anti-slavery meetings took place in a family home of his ancestors in Pennsylvania, that his ancestors invented the wigwag and traded the patent for free rail travel for life. A human family is a web of stories and lives that have more variety than the 7 musical notes could ever produce in song. And it was into this web that all of us were thrust. My professor went to the eldest family, and all of us were scattered among the children of his humans' children, and their families, and the families their children began that took us all over the world. I suppose we were lucky that Earth's capital city, Louisville, was also a popular transportation hub, and had been for centuries, making it easy for everyone to come together for an easy pickup. This human concern for family bonds might at first seem to run at odds with my original thesis. After all, if blood relations matter so much, how can they bond so well to anything not of their blood? My professor theorized that early human studies of evolution, which postulated an exosolar origin of life, were in fact correct. That life began on some other world and was launched into space, carried on debris after the cradle of life was impacted by an asteroid, and all races of the galaxy are bound together as a result. all of us born of the same warm little pond of their Darwin's imagination, but far, far from where he imagined it might be. If this theory bears fruit, then the whole of the galaxy truly is one family, and every fight and battle is a civil war. I, for one, as an academic, must hold back my judgment, raising it only because it is at least one possibility. But my answer lies in their communal nature. Humans tamed wolves and formed a symbiotic relationship with them that carries down into the present day. I won't say it does not gall me just a little bit to look very much like their pets, but perhaps it has helped with my own integration into their society as well. I look like what they've been bonding to for tens of thousands of years. Watching the representative depart and feeling the waves of relief at my back as the weeks of worry came to a close, I thought we were in for some relative peace and quiet while waiting for the ponderously slow human courts of law to do their work. You'd think I would be used to being wrong by this point. I was right for at least a few hours. The De La Mesa guards took to sitting on the front porch of the Walker home, and while they were shocked when Rebecca brought them food, their tales gave away their best efforts to remain stoic and silent. Human guards were added to their numbers before lunch was served. 2 men in black suits. They quickly struck up a rapport with my people's guards. I observed unobtrusively as the humans opened conversation with their counterparts. A De La Mesa is usually reluctant to speak to someone unknown, unless they need to. We can do it, of course. But we tend to be reticent about those with unfamiliar smells. There is an island chain with tribes of ancient lineage in the Earth's Pacific Ocean, and when strangers meet there, it is the custom to engage in long conversations about ancestry, trying to find a connection between each other so that they have reason to avoid violence. De La Mesa will engage in a long consumption of scents, trying to find a common presence that will ease our discomfort with a stranger, a place we have both been, a person we both know, a food we have both recently eaten. Without a scent opening, it is very difficult for us to speak first. Humans solved all that by way of the spoken word, asking questions far outside the realm of scent and drawing us in. Observing these 2 sets of guards mingling together, the 2 giant bald males began to talk shop about the job they were on. Presented with an opening and an invitation to speak first, the De La Mesa guards relaxed at least a little, and I listened in from the other side of the door as the 2 opened up. It may be hypocritical of me to have been so reluctant to capture the whispers of my humans, but so willing to listen in unobserved with the 4 guards outside the door. But it was too good a chance to see more of my kind interact with humans. The shop talk about their professions led my kind to discussion of their favorite techniques of security and their preferred hand weapons. We are one of the few predator races to evolve intelligence after all, so it is perhaps unsurprising that when 2 predatory species with similar interests come together, either conflict or common ground become inevitable. See, the nice thing about Krav Maga is that when you need a weapon, your opponent is always kind enough to just give it to you. Maybe so, but a good bite to the throat and you don't have an opponent for very long. I could hear the De La Mesa security guard open and snap his jaw shut. The human guards whistled appreciatively. "Can we see that up close? Those are some impressive jaws. Bet you could rip a man's throat out." The appreciative whistles on the other side of the door suggested that my counterparts had obliged and opened their jaws again to let the humans get a closer look at our favorite weapon. The utter fearlessness of some humans never ceases to fascinate some races. Many a human has made their final words, "Hey y'all, watch this," and then done something insanely dangerous. As a species, it is a wonder that they, particularly their reckless adolescent males, reach adulthood in great numbers. For my counterparts outside, having another species willingly come close to their deadly jaws was equal parts confusing and fascinating, and exciting. The one nearest to the door was wagging his tail so hard that I thought someone was knocking. Of course, we don't have the best mouths for that, but we make really nice substitutes. I could hear the humans outside opening their belt carriers and removing the tools of their trade, the buzzing noise of a taser, the tap of a thin metal baton against stone, and then the tap of phone screens. There's a long history to human weapons. These are some of our favorite ones throughout history. And the low rumble of my own people appreciating a very different cultural exchange from the sort I was engaged in carried on. When I left, the embassy security guard from our homeworld was saying, A joint forces operation with the Terran military might be worthwhile. That, incidentally, is where the first joint military operation between races got its start. The human security guard reached out to a former officer, who reached out to his son, a current officer of high rank, and after some simulations between himself and the Delamasan Military High Command. Well, that is how the story was relayed to me. It's fortunate that I left and wrote that down immediately after it happened, because had I waited, it might have been lost in the chaos that began when the reporters showed up.